is noon now, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie Obar Garcia, and I am the Public Programs, Diversity, and Inclusion Manager at the San Antonio Museum of Art. Lectures and artist conversations are made possible by the generous support from the Louis A. and Frances B. Wagner Lecture Fund. Thank you for being here this afternoon for our Lunch and Learn, Borders and the Artwork of Wendy Red Star. I would like to introduce Lana Metter, Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at SAMA, who has been the lead curator for the presentation of the Wendy Red Star, A Scratch on the Earth exhibition. At the conclusion of this talk, we will be opening it up for Q&A. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, that's where you'll be able to submit those Q&A questions for Nadiah or for Lana to answer. So you can type them in there. And now I will turn it over to Lana. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for spending part of your day and your lunch hour with us. I'm very excited to hear from our wonderful speaker today, Nadiah Rivera Fellah. Before we get started, I'd like to recite the museum's land remembrance. The San Antonio Museum of Art is mindful of its location on the ancestral lands of the first peoples of this area, including the Ashtot-Gana, Carrizo, Comecrudo tribe of Texas, the Tehuan Band of Mission Indians, the Top Pilam Quahiltecan Nation, and the many other local Native peoples who have connections with this land. We also remember the peoples whose names and contributions have been erased over time, including migratory peoples of Semanohoc. The San Antonio Museum of Art recognizes the many diverse autochthonous peoples still connected to this sacred land and living creation, in all walks of life as inhabitants of the sky, earth, and water along the Yanawana River. We pay our highest respects to these communities and honor their histories, continued presence, and legacies in San Antonio as a means of recognizing the truth and complexity of this Somisek vast land's history. Today is our final public program associated with the special exhibition, Wendy Red Star, A Scratch on the Earth. And so before I introduce our speaker, I just want to remind everybody that this exhibition is on view just for a few more days through Sunday, May 8th. So if you haven't seen it already or you need to come back and view it again, bring your friends and family and please enjoy our exhibition, Wendy Red Star, A Scratch on the Earth, which was curated at Newark by Dr. Nadiah Rivera Fellah. Dr. Fellah specializes in Latin American and global contemporary art. She joined the Cleveland Museum of Art as Associate Curator of Contemporary Art in November 2019. And prior to that, she held curatorial positions at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Allen Memorial Art Museum at Oberlin College, and served in various capacities at the Newark Museum in New Jersey. And it was at Newark where she curated the celebrated exhibition, Wendy Red Star, A Scratch on the Earth, and served as the primary author and editor for the accompanying catalog, which we have for sale in our museum shop, and I highly recommend it. She has also taught courses on curatorial practice and modern and contemporary art at the City University of New York. Fellah received her BA in art history at Oberlin College, and in 2019, she completed a PhD at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Her dissertation focused on the role of photography in capturing stories of migration in the US-Mexico borderlands from the 1970s to the present, a topic which I'm sure she'll touch on a bit today in her talk with us. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nadiah Rivera Fellah.
Thank you so much, Lana. Let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can see some images. Oops. Here we go. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I want to thank Lana and Stephanie for inviting me to participate in this program and all of you for joining me today. As Lana mentioned, I co-organized this exhibition, Scratch on the Earth, with Trisha Lawlin Bloom, who's the curator of American art at the Newark Museum, and this originally opened in 2019. So I really started my work with Wendy Red Star in 2018, and we met at that time to start talking about what a group of works or a general organizing concept for a mid-career survey exhibition could be. And we started talking about borders. She told me there's this concept, a word in Crow, Nugaha, which roughly translates as a scratch on the earth. And that's the word they used to describe the reservation's borders when they came into existence. Because, you know, she said, there's no Crow word for borders. And that word became the subtitle of the exhibition, A Scratch on the Earth. And it refers to this period after 1880 when the US government policy prioritized keeping Crow people on the reservation. And this was a policy that was reinforced by US military and pro-tribal police. Officially, the government claims that the policy was put in place to end tribal warfare, so fighting between tribal nations all based in the Plains region of the United States. But in reality, it was because indigenous claims to the land did not benefit the country's colonial vision of conquest, which was formed by this ideology of manifest destiny. And of course, manifest destiny is this idea that some divine kind of higher power was sanctioning or somehow blessing the westward expansion of the American settlers, and was used as justification for ultimately displacing indigenous people from their lands. So Nugaha implies that a person stays within or on one side of the scratch, the invisible borders delineated for the Crow tribe by the US government. And the Apsalika or Crow word also implies a historical shift in self-perception for the Crow people, a consciousness of being defined by government boundaries, and the seeds of a post-colonial, post-reservation identity. So again, the idea that borders did not exist in this language, or the concept was not a common one until after colonial conquest. So this struck me as a really interesting concept, since at the time I was finishing a dissertation, as Lana mentioned, on the US-Mexico borderlands, and had been thinking about borders quite a lot. As Wendy and I talked more, we realized that many of the series of bodies of works that we wanted to show related back to this concept of borders, physically or conceptually. Borders, as you know, concretely outline the geographical boundaries of spaces that we claim as markers of citizenship or membership. Additionally, they contour the edges of our lived experience, as the renowned border theorist Etienne Balibar has claimed, quote, "To define or identify in general is nothing other than to trace a border or to assign boundaries." Wendy herself is an enrolled member of the Crow tribe and has used her studio practice to deepen her own knowledge of Crow culture, drawing on archival and historical research as a method to explore the history of her culture's borders and physical territories. The duality of the artist's identity as both Crow and Irish American adds complexity to her interest in this kind of landscape of cultural identity. She has often said that growing up and going to public school in Montana, that Crow history was not taught. And it wasn't until she was in college that she learned about Native American history. And she recalls that learning that history felt revolutionary and inspired her to learn about the history of the Crow Nation and re-educate herself with knowledge, which she could then, feed into her artwork and could share with others. And this is something that I've really come to appreciate more and more in the time I've known Wendy and had the honor of working with her, is that her history is really all of our histories. It's kind of useless to divide or think of it as different or specialized information. Crow history is American history, and it's really relevant to all of us. And here I'm showing an image from the artist's 2011 photographic series included in the exhibition. titled "My Home is Where My Teepee Sits." And this is a series that creates gridded collages, as you can see, it's a series of 5 photographs of 5 elements of Crow reservation life. It includes brightly colored government houses or HUD houses, broken down res cars, sweat lodges, churches, and signs, which, as you can see here, signal often entering or leaving the reservation or territory. So these are visual markers of occupation in a way. And these are large scale colored photographs. The series uses a title, "My Home is Where My Teepee Sits," that is based on a phrase that a Crow chief responsible for negotiating the borders of the tribe's territory said, and combines it with these visual common attributes of everyday life. So while negotiating with the US government to define Crow territory, this was in 1851, the chief, and his name is Chief Sits in the Middle of the Land, said, "Where my 4 base teepee poles touch the ground will be my land." And this was a statement, kind of a metaphor to refer to 4 geographical points that would outline Crow country, these 4 specific landmarks. So in this series, I love that the artist is referencing a classic series by this German photographers pair, husband-wife couple, Bern and Hillebecker, who made these kind of gridded typologies or families of objects with industrial buildings that are black and white photographs, kind of classic mid-century conceptual photography. But Red Star takes on this conceptualist approach, and she infuses it with color, and she also infuses it with contemporary and historical context. And I'm showing an image here of a project that Wendy did as a student, but it's an early example and kind of an origin story of much of the work in this exhibition. And what I now realize was a remarkable precursor to contemporary land acknowledgements and reclamations that are happening now. As an undergraduate at Montana State University in Bozeman from 2000 to 2004, Red Star was studying art and Native American studies and discovered that the Crow tribe's traditional lands once stretched across most of present-day Wyoming and Montana before they were drastically reduced over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. And this was through treaties initiated by the US government. So between 1851 and 1905, so roughly a 50-year period, a territory that once spanned 38.5 million acres was reduced to 2.3 million acres. So from 38.5 million acres to less than 2.5 million acres. And that is the current size of the Crow Reservation in Montana, where Red Star was born and raised. She learned that her tribe was never adequately compensated for the ceded land, and that an aggressive strategy of cultural repression accompanied the taking of that territory. Through her research, Red Star realized that her university's campus was located on land that formerly belonged to the Crow Nation. Struck by the importance of this unacknowledged history, she initiated a multi-site art installation of teepees around the campus to visually mark the land as Crow territory. And that's what this picture is showing. Large and handcrafted objects made of lodgepole pine, Red Star's teepees were architectural interventions meant to disrupt the daily traffic of the student body, blocking high traffic walkways and occupying common areas. And she told me that she specifically, in preparation for this installation, would watch between classes, some of them really common paths that students would take to traverse campus. And she chose some of those pathways to block with these teepees. So really trying to get in people's faces with them. These widely recognized structures rendered in material form the neglected history of the Crow tribe's ancestral lands. In this image, documenting the installation, 5 structures span the 50-yard line of the university's football field, accentuated with red strips of fabric that reference Red Star's family history as healers in the community. The slender wooden poles visually dominate their setting, reaching into the blue sky, and are set against the mountainous landscape beyond. Red Star says of the sculptural installation, "I chose the football field as the culminating site of my installation because it's a valued piece of land reserved for the privileged few and acts as a capitalistic representation of American culture. I wanted everyone to know this is Crow territory. One of the central images in the show, or central artworks in the show, that really reinforces the key concept of borders and territory is this matrilineal map that I'm showing here, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Over the course of her career, Red Star has done extensive archival research to investigate the details of the boundaries of the Crow Reservation and how they were established. In this piece, which is titled, has a long title, Map of the Allotted Lands of the Crow Reservation, Montana, a Tribute to Many Good Women from 2016. Red Star appropriates a 1907 map of the Crow Reservation and physically layers the names and images of Crow women dressed in traditional regalia over their ancestral land plots. In this way, she recalls the traditional passing of land through a matrilineal or female-based structure that is a legacy of her tribe's pre-conquest history. So following the General Allotment Act of 1887, the US government surveyed and divided up Indians' land with the stated intention, as I said, of ending tribal warfare and influencing agricultural livelihoods among tribal members. In addition to entirely displacing tribal territories and culture, this act also replaced a matriarchal societal structure with a patriarchal one. And it was only at this point in history that land became tied to the male head of household names. So in this image, you can see there's, to the right, and most of the image is a map that is drawn with kind of different points on it. But to the far left, you'll see kind of columns of text. And all of that are listed names of each family member or of each family that corresponds to a plot of land somewhere on the map that is their designated assigned plot. And the government official who was assigned to the Crow Reservation who gathered this information and created this map went to each household, to the male of each household, and used their name to kind of assign those family plots. So unknowingly, just because that is customary in how the US government runs censuses or, how they designate ownership, he unknowingly replaced kind of like a system that was followed kinship through the female head. The females were kind of the head of each family, and instead assigned it to the male head of household. So in traditional Apsalica society prior to 1887, children actually followed the mother's family line, a matrilineal social organization that established kinship affiliation through women. This was largely because Crow women represented structural stability in the community. They built and maintained homes, they provided food, they held political clout, they were artists, tailors, teachers, and caregivers, and were acknowledged as such. For this artwork, a map of the allotted lands, Red Star used social media to contact Crow women with historical ties to the land and asked them to send her photographs of themselves in traditional elk tooth dresses, which Red Star describes as the ultimate symbol of Crow womanhood. And there's a couple of elk tooth dresses in this exhibition that Red Star made for herself and her daughter when she was young. It was important to the artist that these crowdsourced photographs were chosen by the women, demonstrating their agency and control over their own imagery. Red Star uses social media in various ways throughout her practice as a democratic strategy to connect with Native communities and other Indigenous artists, and emphasizes that digital platforms are an opportunity to invite her community to participate in a direct way and connect with folks who are far away from one another. She reflects, what does social media mean for the future of our tribe? We may be spread out, but we can carve out territory on the internet. So imagining a spatial terrain beyond geographical ones, a digital space of occupation that's become part of this piece and part of the show in general. So after expanding that 1907 map to a large scale, one that was meant to envelop viewers into Crow country, Red Star pinned color transparencies of the photographs on the surface and handwrote the women's tribal names along the edges of the map. The result is a colorful landscape of cascading portraits representing a multitude of generations and families. And here's a detail. The translucency of the portraits integrates the women with the map, inscribing their names and colorful images into the monochrome document of gridded points that demarcate each acre of land, thus tying their images to the physical spaces from which they were displaced. With this work, Red Star effectively reclaims a government record that signified a land invaded, surveyed, and codified with the intent of controlling the people who lived there. In A Scratch on the Earth, this large-scale matrilineal map, which originally she created in 2016 as a site-specific installation for the Portland Art Museum, is recreated and expanded. It introduces the geographical interpretation of the show, as well as the mixture of media, in this case, color photography, installation, historical documents that are a hallmark of the artist's practice. Although I obviously won't get to cover every work in this exhibition in the space of this talk, I wanted to devote some time to two photographic series that are included, the 1873 and 1880 Crow Peace Delegation series. And this here is an installation view of the 1873 series, which, as you can see, is a series of 6 archival photographs enlarged and annotated by the artist in red marker. And this is a detail of one of those. These photographic works are part of Red Star's archival research into Crow figures responsible for the present day boundaries of the tribe's lands. In each series, she manipulates historical portraits from the National Anthropological Archives by adding her own handwritten notations in red ink. The written text includes personal observations and historical facts about the Crow delegations. As Red Star explains, when I was growing up, there was such a pressure to prove one's Crow ancestry that previous generations didn't have. I was surprised to see in these photographs, tribal leaders from generations ago were wearing things from other tribes, like the Lakota or Cheyenne moccasins that old Crow wears. I came to realize that the history of identity goes beyond surface value. There's a complexity to it, end quote. In this way, Red Star's notations allude to the idea that proving one's authenticity is a modern construction of identity that has arisen especially in the 20th century. The first Crow Indian delegation traveled to Washington, D.C. on October 21st, 1873, and included a group of 9 Crow chiefs and 3 of their wives. The group made the long trip by horse and train from Montana to the Capitol, where they met with President Ulysses S. Grant regarding Crow territorial boundaries. After 1873, representatives of the Crow Nation traveled to Washington several times to conduct business with the US government, the results of which ultimately included the coerced cession or loss of Crow tribal lands to the government. In this series, Red Star meticulously outlined the contours of each figure's elaborate outfits, accoutrements, and hairstyles, isolating each individual. The photographs are transformed into roadmaps or blueprints of her own research, kind of a redrawing of territorial boundaries created by colonizers. Each print requires careful looking and encourages intimate proximity to the portrait, as Red Star draws attention to the materiality of the sitter's regalia, bringing each figure to life for viewers. Like many other works in the exhibition, they include handwritten notes, and language is central to her exploration of these critical issues. And she uses it to incite knowledge production, humor, and critical perspectives. In this striking portrait from the 1873 Crow Peace Delegation, Chief Old Crow, which is on the right, and his young wife, Good or Pretty Medicine Pipe, gaze at the camera with steady, serious expressions. Although the photograph captures a moment in time when Pretty Medicine Pipe was 14 years old, the subsequent events of her life are brought to bear on our viewing experience through Red Star's notations. We learn that she married 3 times, that the names of her husbands and children, and where she is buried. This extensive backstory in combination with the kind of stacked geometric lines of the blanket she wears, accentuated by the artist's red marker, lend monumentality to her small stature. And I love this image in particular from the series because of this incisive gaze from the female sitter, and how she almost looks like a contemporary figure here, someone remarkably ahead of her time. An object that is prominent in each of these photographs in this series, a peacock feather duster that many of the chiefs proudly hold, has been entirely highlighted with the artist's red pen. It was rumored that while visiting Washington, D.C., members of the Crow delegation attended a performance by a burlesque dancer who gave each of them a feather duster after the show. And Wendy says, when the chiefs returned to Montana, a new fashion trend was born. Sub-chiefs and young Crow men were eager to acquire their own feather dusters, end quote. So while the dusters are the subject of this humorous anecdote, kind of recalling this burlesque dance that they were shown, they're also a material reminder of the blatant disregard that government officials showed to Crow delegation and how far they would go to distract the delegation members from the really crucial and important agenda of preserving Crow territories. And this is just one of the details that runs throughout this series. I really can't emphasize enough the level of detail and number of narratives that these photographs generate. So truly, if you have a time, if you haven't been to the show already and have a chance to go and look at these in person and up close, I highly encourage you to do so. In the subsequent series, the 1880 Peace Delegation, it includes 5 pairs of images, and I'm showing an installation view here to indicate how they're shown in this exhibition as a full series of kind of 5 diptychs, essentially, which I think is super important, and I'll explain why in a minute. And I know that individual images from the series are in other museums' collections and are often shown singly. And I think that's a bit of the shame considering how much complexity they take on when shown all together as the artist conceived of them. Again, this series is taken from photographic documents of a trip the tribal leaders took to Washington, D.C. in 1880 to negotiate the boundaries of the Crow territory. And so also thinking about the gap of time since 1873, these tribal leaders make this trip all the way across the country to negotiate the territories their land occupies, and assumingly results were not as they anticipated. And so 7 years later, they make this really long trip again. The 1880 Peace Delegation portraits, which some of which are shown here, were taken by a photographer. We know the name of the photographer. His name was Charles Milton Bell, and he often photographed Indian visitors to the Capitol for the U.S. Geological Survey of the Territories, the Department of Interior, and the Bureau of American Ethnology. So I also find that an interesting fact that here's someone who's kind of gathering data for geological surveys or ethnological data, and that is the person to assigned to take these portraits of the Crow chiefs when they visit DC. The double format of the 1880 Crow Peace Delegation portraits, taken from the front and from the side of each sitter, signals the unsettling historical fact that sitters were initially objects of anthropological inquest. While 19th century Western portraiture traditions functioned as a method to honor the sitter, photography also became a way to establish and delimit the terrain of the other. And the camera became an important link between the sphere of culture and a method of social regulation. The photographer and theorist Alan Sekula has critically examined the history of the mugshot, many of you may be familiar with, a head-on shot at standard focal length with consistent lighting and a profile view for added data, established by a French social scientist in the 1880s and 90s, around the same time, as a way of archiving images of the criminal body towards social control. While the Crow Peace Delegation portraits are not quite in this vein, they're not quite mugshots, there is a troubling slippage here between the institutionalization of image cataloging for police purposes and the portraits of the Crow chiefs made at the behest of the US government during their delegation visits to Washington. In more recent decades, the artist also recalls of these portraits, and in her making of this series, I began to notice that I wasn't the only one captivated by Medicine Crow's image. And this is the diptych of portraits of Chief Medicine Crow. I started seeing the image on Honest Tea and Whole Foods, on the cover of Native Peoples magazine, not to mention the countless number of artists all making remakes of his portrait. Red Star's use and transformation of the documents is an important intervention in past histories and more recent appropriation of the chief's images for commercial use. Her work actively resists archival systems of control, as well as the trends of American mass media consumption, and by proxy preserves the historical agency of the peace delegations. She explains, I wanted people to realize that the images of Medicine Crow were of a human being, a reservation era chief with important ties to the forming of the Crow Indian Reservation, the loss of land, the changing of a people, and the resilience of a culture. So again, you can see she's used her notation and these arrows to kind of point out so many details in these and like bring in new narratives and stories you might not notice. And her red markings are interventions in these historical records, reclaiming them in a way. But as documents, I've come to appreciate they are not so different from the way in which the US government continues to delineate our borders and designate the other or outsiders from ourselves. And I'm actually showing a screenshot here of the media gallery section of the US Customs and Border Patrol protection page, which I captured just a few days ago, so it is current. But I always find it so interesting that these are the typical official images that persist through time, and talking about decades, but also centuries. This display of technology is a really common, so the use of the camera on the left, you see 3 images here that just happen to be like top images in that media gallery. On the left, we have border patrolmen in these all-terrain vehicles kind of driving along the wall. The romantic imagery of patrolmen on horseback, this one in the center, there are several of these on this official webpage, kind of invoking the idyllic cowboy on horseback, which kind of feeds into these historical legacies of manifest destiny. And then the image on the right, this apprehension of illegal migrants with gloved hands. So you can see that the patrolman is kind of covered from head to toe, has sunglasses on, wears gloves as he pats down this migrant with, you know, the tech in his holster. So there's this separation between him and the body that he is apprehending. So all of these elements kind of feed into the perception that the protection of our borders is clean, it's rational, it's clinical, that it somehow justifies it because we're bringing order where there might otherwise be chaos. And this is kind of going into my own historical research of borders. As you can see from these newspaper headlines from the 1980s, these images haven't changed in the last 25 years. The image on the left, patrolling the border on horseback, this is from the Arizona Times 1980. You see these really idyllic kind of romanticized images of patrolmen on horseback. The one on the bottom, the all-terrain vehicles as border patrolmen, I know it's not a great image, are in head to toe, kind of covered, gloved hands as they pat down a migrant that they've apprehended. And then the image on the top with the mug shots of these undocumented crossers, which kind of harkens back to those images that the US government is taking of pro-delegation leaders. So it's remarkable to me that in the past 25 years since these images were circulated, things really haven't changed, but also in the past 150 years since Bell's images were taken of the peace delegations in DC. And I would say, to offer just a bit of hope, the main difference is that 25 years ago, pre-internet, news media was almost entirely reliant on government agencies to provide or sanction official images accompanying news stories about the border, or to document imagery of outsiders or trespassers on supposedly stolen land. And today, let's see, oops. Images like this one, which you may have seen, captured by photographers, travel at the speed of light, go viral, and are able to show us the reality of interactions with migrants, what they look like on the border. And this is an image that you probably have all seen when the migrant caravan arrived at the US-Mexico border from Honduras in 2018. This photograph was snapped by Korean photographer Kim Kyun-hun, and it captures a woman at center. Her name is Maria Lila Meza Castro, 39-year-old migrant woman from Honduras who is running away from tear gas canisters that you can see kind of billowing smoke behind her with her twin daughters, 5-year-old twin daughters, on November 25th of 2018. So there are ways that we can take agency over capturing and circulation of imagery, much as Red Star has done in her reclamation of the archival photographs with her red marker notations, and hold government officials accountable in ways that had not been done in the past. So I'll end my talk with one final work in the exhibition, a timeline titled "Where They Make the Noise," that documents the history of the Crow Fair and makes use of both historical photography from archives, as well as the artist's own snapshots or family photographs from recent years. Where They Make the Noise is at Newark, it was 130 feet long linear installation. I don't know how long it is at the San Antonio Museum, that combines the format of a historical timeline with a photo collage and handwritten narrative, bringing Crow Fair to life. Crow Fair is an annual celebration that came to symbolize the endurance of Indigenous Crow customs. Red Star's chronological installation, which circumscribes the parameters of a gallery space, and combines her handwritten notations, historical photographs, evokes the pageantry of the fair. Crow Fair was begun in 1904 by a government agent assigned to the Crow Reservation. His name was S.C. Reynolds, who conceived of the festival as a way to reinforce the agricultural aims of recent government policies. It was one instance in which the government relaxed its strict policies forbidding dances and ceremonies and enabled a revival of native rituals. While Crow Fair was originally intended as a method of assimilation, the government lost interest in the event after World War II, and it has instead continues to be a vital means of keeping Crow culture alive, ushering in new trends like elaborately adorned trucks and cars that are now part of the procession, along with traditional parade on horseback. This annual week-long festival is held in August, and tens of thousands of participants gather at the fair site near Billings, Montana from all over the country. Each morning in that week takes place, each morning a parade takes place wherein participants dressed in their elegant regalia ride ornamented horses and vehicles along a route that encircles a sprawling encampment of teepees. This procession references the tribe's customs of moving from one camp to another, dressed in their finest and most formal attire, a visually arresting show of strength to all they encountered. Red Star's images of fairgoers on horseback, riding parade floats, and in group portraits span the walls of the galleries to literalize the passage of time. So it's really, and she marks each of the decades from the 1900s up to the 2000s. The annual recurring nature of the fair is echoed in the circularity of the installation's timeline, which evokes the physical occupation of space by one of the largest Native American gatherings in the country, as well as the resilience of pro-traditions across generational lines, producing and expanding community ties to tradition beyond the geographic spaces of the Crow Reservation. And I love how this work really brings things full circle, so to speak, that it's a way in which Crow communities can carve out a social space of existence in addition to animating traditions on the physical spaces where they live. And so I'll end here and leave you with these questions. What can we learn about borders by looking at them in these different contexts? In the context of Crow territory or of Wendy Red Star's work, and in the context of the United States? In what ways are borders useful, and in what ways are they entirely inadequate to outline expansive thinking and hopeful futures? And there, stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Nadiah. That was fantastic. And, you know, Wendy's use of photography is something that really fascinates me and really drew me to this exhibition. I know she's a multidisciplinary artist, and there's a broad, range of media included in the show, but it's really strong in her use of photography, and what you shared with us today just makes it even richer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have a few minutes to take questions. If you in the audience have any questions for Nadiah, please put them in the Q&A feature. We have one that has come through from Michelle. She's asking about Wendy's installation at Montana State University, and wondered, do you know if those installations were done with permission?
I don't think so. I think that was kind of like the point of it, is that she intervened without permission. And I mean, they're kind of public spaces because they are the university, on the university. And I don't think that she got in any kind of real trouble for it. But I think, yeah, the point was that she kind of snuck onto the football field and put those poles there in the early morning hours after sunrise. And she has talked a little bit about, how her mom helped her get the poles there and set them up. To kind of create that moment of shock when people see them.
That's fantastic. And yeah, so much more impactful when it's unexpected in that way, and forces everybody to kind of think about why and how this came to be. Okay, it looks like there's another question. This one is from Trip. The use of red pen on the delegation photographs always reminds me of the traditional tools teachers use to grade tests or papers. Can you comment on the corrective nature of her work in these photos?
That is a great question. So well phrased. I think there is, like a historical corrective nature to it. I think also when you talk about teachers kind of putting notations on schoolwork, thinking about kind of writing in the margins, so in the historical margins, so thinking of like that, an intervention in that way. And I think too, another kind of like element to it is like this transgressive nature to it, like kind of thinking about graffiti and how you might take something and write over something else in a way that's not meant to be. So I think that's a really good observation, that it's like the red marker that is meant to be a corrective in many ways.
I like that connection that you just made with the graffiti, because I hadn't thought of that myself. And that I always think of the graffiti as a way of somebody staking claim and taking up the space and, you know, reclaiming perhaps a neighborhood for themselves or their community. So that's a wonderful, you know, comparison with those delegation photos.
Yeah.
And another question about the delegation photos, whether those are original photographs. So kind of the process that Wendy uses to create these pieces.
Since they were in the anthropological archives, I don't think that she was able to mark on the actual photographs. My understanding is that they let her make high quality scans of the images, and then she took those and then reprinted them and then made her markings on them. And those are the photographs that are in the exhibition. And I think they're also enlarged. They're much larger than those historical documents would have been.
Right, yeah, the scale is quite nice.
Yeah.
If we have any more questions, now's the time to put those burning questions into the Q&A. And if not, I think we've come to the end point of the lunchtime talk.
Yes, thank you so much to everybody that joined us today. And thank you so much to Nadiah and Lana for being here. So for spending your lunchtime hour with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who joined us. It's always a pleasure to talk about Wendy's work, and I appreciate being invited.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Everybody have a
you.
great rest of your day.